I returned to Coldwater on Christmas Eve after 7 years of silence, believing I had finally grown strong enough to face the man who had haunted every winter of my childhood. The driveway was covered with a thin layer of frost crunchy under my boots, and the house looked smaller than I remembered, a sagging wooden frame wrapped in mismatched Christmas lights that blinked out of sync, as if even they were afraid of the temper inside. My breath fogged in the air while I stood at the door, holding the overnight bag that carried my papers for a new apartment in St. Louis, the papers I should never have brought into this house. When I stepped inside, the smell hit me first, a sour mix of stale beer and old wood smoke, the exact odor that used to cling to my hair whenever my father pulled me close to yell at me. Raymond Reed sat in his recliner with a bottle already open, the same brand he had sworn off 10 times before. He looked older, heavier face rugged with veins that stood out whenever he lifted the bottle. His eyes narrowed the moment he saw me. Yet a twisted smile spread across his face, as if my return proved something he had always wanted to believe. "You came back. I knew you would." His voice carried that familiar pride soaked in control. "I kept my coat on. I did not plan to stay longer than dinner, maybe an hour. I told myself I owed him at least that much, though deep down I knew it was not guilt, but fear that had brought me back. Fear that he would show up at my new job. Fear that he would show up at my apartment. Fear that he would look me in the eye one day and remind me I would always be his property unless I confronted him once and for all. The table was already set, 2 plates facing each other across a scarred wooden surface. He insisted we sit and eat. I felt myself slipping into old habits, sitting straight, speaking softly, answering only when asked. He drank through most of the meal, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, asking questions that were not really questions. "So Springfield has not made you too good for your own father. So now you think you can run a library branch like you are a big shot." He chuckled without humor. My stomach curled with each tone of mockery. I tried to redirect the conversation, asking about his health, the neighbors, anything to keep the mood from shifting. It worked for a few moments until he saw my bag near the stairs. He pointed at it with a twitch in his jaw. "What is that?" I said. "It was just an overnight bag." He stood, grabbed it before I could stop him, and tore the zipper open. Papers spilled out, including the folder from my new landlord. His fingers closed around the document with the St. Louis address. "What is this? You leaving again? You think you can just walk out of here like last time?" His voice rose, bouncing off the thin walls. I took a step back and told him calmly that I had a new job opportunity, that I was planning a fresh start, that it had nothing to do with him. The more gently I spoke, the harder he seemed to boil. "Fresh start. That is what your mother said before she died. Leaving. Running. Like cowards." The bottle in his hand swung slightly as he advanced. I tried to back away toward the stairs, but he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You do not get to leave me again." His breath smelled like raw anger and cheap whiskey. I pulled away, and he slapped me so fast my vision went white. My cheek flared with heat. I stumbled and hit the wall. Before I could regain balance, he shoved me again, and I fell onto my knees, the hardwood sending a jolt through my ribs. He kept shouting words, slurred, but each one dripping with the same message. "You owe me. I raised you. You are nothing without me." He kicked my side once, not hard enough to break anything but enough to make my breath vanish. Instinct told me to run, so I crawled toward the stairs. I grabbed the railing and pulled myself up step by step. I could hear him behind me, his heavy boots hitting the wood. He grabbed my ankle on the 4th step and yanked. I clung to the railing nails, scraping. He dragged me down a few inches, but I kicked backward on reflex, my heel hitting his shin. He cursed and let go long enough for me to scramble upward. My heart pounded like it was trying to break out of my chest. I reached the top landing. My old bedroom door was open, the faded pink paint peeling in strips. I rushed inside hoping to close the door, but he was too fast. He shoved me hard, and I fell onto the floor near the foot of the bed. I tried to stand, but he slammed the door shut, and I heard the metallic click of the latch he had installed years ago when I was a teenager, and he claimed it was to keep me from sneaking out. Now I understood it had always been about control. I shouted for him to stop, but his footsteps faded down the hallway. I lay on my stomach ribs aching, cheek burning the cold floor seeping through my clothes. The only light came through the thin line under the door, where the Christmas lights from outside cast a faint red glow. My breath shook as I listened to his footsteps pacing downstairs. I knew then that if I wanted to live beyond dawn, I had to find a way out of that room, and I swore to myself that if I survived the night, I would never come back to this house, or to the man who believed my life belonged to him. My earliest memories are not of toys or laughter or warm kitchen smells like most people describe when they talk about childhood. My earliest memories are of doors slamming hard enough to shake the walls and the sound of my father's boots stomping down the hallway like a warning drumbeat. I was 5 when I first learned that silence could be a form of survival. If I stayed quiet, if I stayed small, sometimes he forgot I existed. But the nights he drank, which became most nights after my mother died, he always remembered me. My mother passed away when I was 10, a winter evening slick with black ice on Highway 19. She never made it home from her shift at the diner. The police knocked at our door around 9:30, hats in hands, voices gentle. My father listened, nodded once, shut the door, and then went straight to the kitchen cabinet where he kept his bottles. He opened a new one without even removing his coat. He did not cry. He did not say her name again. By the end of that week, he had hammered shut the cabinet where she kept her baking pans, as if sealing her memory away kept him from feeling anything. In his mind, grief had only one outlet: anger. For a while after her death, his rage was directed at the world. He punched the fridge so hard it carried a dent that never came out. He kicked the trash bin across the room because it reminded him that she was not there to empty it. He yelled at the television, the mailman, the weather, and God. But eventually his anger stopped looking outward and turned inward toward the only living thing he felt he still owned: me. The first time he hit me, it was because I poured too much laundry detergent into the washer. I was 11. He stood over me with the spilled suds spreading across the floor and slapped me across the back of my head so suddenly that I bit my tongue and tasted blood. I remember the way he looked at me afterward, not regretful, not unsure, just irritated like I had inconvenienced him. That was the night I started sleeping inside my closet. The small space felt safer than my bed next to the window. I lined the floor with blankets and pillows and curled myself up like a stray animal. The house got colder each winter, but nothing felt as cold as the uncertainty of my father's mood. There were good days, or what passed for good days, in that house. Days when he worked at the factory for 10 hours and came home too tired to speak. Days when he sat in his chair staring at baseball reruns with glazed eyes. On those days, I tiptoed through the house like it was sacred ground, trying not to wake a sleeping beast. The bad days were loud. When he drank, his voice grew bigger than the walls. He would pace, muttering to himself, slurring accusations at people long gone, at neighbors, at coworkers, at my dead mother. And when his anger peaked, he looked for something to break. Sometimes it was a plate. Sometimes it was a chair. Sometimes it was me. Once, when I was 13, he grabbed my wrist so hard that I felt something crack. The doctor at the clinic asked me what happened. I said I slipped on the porch. When she looked doubtful, I said it again with more confidence. The truth felt dangerous in my mouth. I learned early that telling the truth did not save you. It only made things worse when he found out. Holidays were the worst. Everyone else's homes in town lit up with decorations and music, families gathering around tables with turkey and sweet potatoes. Our house stayed dim except for a cheap string of lights my father left up year after year because he could not be bothered to take them down. Christmas was the day he drank the most. He would sit in his recliner with a bottle beside him, watching the snow fall outside like it offended him personally. If I tried to bring him cocoa or ask if he wanted to visit Aunt Marlene down the road, he snapped. "Why do you care? Why do you bother? Why are you still here?" I did not know how to answer him because I had nobody else. Teachers noticed the bruises sometimes. A few asked gentle questions. One school counselor pulled me aside after class and asked if I felt safe at home. I told her my father was strict but not dangerous. The lie came easily. It felt rehearsed because it was. When I was 15, I discovered a new coping mechanism: books. I spent every afternoon inside the public library until closing. The librarian, Mrs. Grant, let me sit in the corner near the heater, pretending not to notice when I stayed until the very last minute because home felt like the opposite of safety. In those quiet aisles surrounded by stories where parents loved their children, or at least did not hurt them, I found a kind of borrowed peace. I read everything I could: mysteries, memoirs, history books. It did not matter what the subject was. As long as the pages drowned out the sounds in my head, I devoured them. That was also the year I decided I wanted to become a librarian, not because it seemed glamorous or impressive, but because it was the one place where I felt like the world was gentle. When I turned 17, I tried to run away for the first time. I saved money from tutoring younger students and babysitting for a neighbor. I packed a small bag and walked to the bus station on a freezing night, but I made the mistake of leaving through the front door. The sound woke my father. He caught me halfway down the driveway, grabbed the back of my coat, and dragged me inside. He did not hit me that time. Instead, he locked me in my bedroom for 2 days with no meals and told me if I ever tried leaving again, he would make sure I never stepped outside that door alive. That threat followed me through every year of my life. Even when I turned 18 and left for good, even when I moved to Springfield, even when I built a quiet life that had nothing to do with him, that voice stayed in my head. I always felt like he could still reach me even through distance. Maybe that is why I never went home. Maybe that is why I stopped taking his calls. Maybe that is why even at 32, sitting in my apartment surrounded by books and quiet evenings, I still woke some nights with the old fear running wild in my chest. The truth is that children who grow up afraid of the person meant to protect them never really stop being afraid. We only learn to carry the fear differently. The night he called 2 weeks before Christmas, leaving message after message, asking me to come home, saying it was important, saying it was about family, saying it was the last time he would ask, I knew it was a mistake to return. But fear has a strange way of disguising itself as responsibility. I told myself I needed closure. I told myself I was strong enough now. I told myself that the past could not hurt me if I walked into it with my head high. I was wrong. Springfield was never glamorous, but to me it was freedom disguised as a Midwestern city with nothing particularly remarkable about it. The day I arrived 7 years ago, carrying a single duffel bag and a folder of community college applications, I stepped off the bus and felt something I had never felt in cold water. Air. Actual breathable air, unpolluted by shouting or fear. I rented a small studio apartment above a bakery on Jefferson Street. The floors creaked, the heater rattled, and the windows let in cold air during winter storms, but I loved that place more than anything I owned. It was the first home that did not require me to shrink myself in order to survive inside it. I found a job at the Springfield Public Library the same month I arrived. It started as part-time shelving books, but I threw myself into the work like it was oxygen. I memorized the layout of the stacks, the catalog system, every regular patron's name. I helped elderly visitors find old newspapers from the 60s, and I read stories to school kids who came during field trips. The library became my sanctuary, the place where my hands stopped trembling, where my mind had space to rest. Over time, I took on more responsibilities. I organized community events, updated the Children's Reading Corner, wrote grant proposals, and helped digitize outdated archives that had been gathering dust for decades. The head librarian, Mr. Carlson, noticed my dedication and started giving me projects he normally handled himself. He had a quiet way about him, a gentle presence that reminded me of safety. He never raised his voice, never made me flinch. After 2 years, he promoted me to full-time. After 4, he encouraged me to apply for a new branch opening on the west side. I did. I got the job. And suddenly, I was no longer the girl who hid in closets. I was a woman building a community space where people could feel seen, valued, safe. That word meant everything to me. Safety. It was not a luxury. It was oxygen. And the more I built a life in Springfield, the more I realized how starved I had always been for a sense of belonging. I made friends slowly. People often say that trauma survivors move through life like they are testing the floorboards for weak spots, and I suppose that was true for me. I kept my circle small. There was Lila from the bakery downstairs who always saved a cinnamon roll for me at the end of the day. There was Mr. Thompson, an older man, who checked out the same Western novels every week and always asked if I had eaten dinner yet. There was also a group of teachers who visited the library regularly, who eventually convinced me to join their Tuesday trivia nights at a local pub. I never told any of them about my father. They only knew that I came from a small town, that things had been hard, that I preferred quiet over chaos. And they accepted me exactly as I was without prying. It felt strange at first to be treated with normal kindness, like I did not have to earn it, like it was something people could simply offer. My apartment grew into a reflection of who I was becoming. Bookshelves lined the walls. Plants gathered near the windows. A yellow lamp flickered warmly on my nightstand every evening. I learned to cook simple meals. I saved money. I took long walks after work listening to audiobooks while the city buzzed around me. Springfield was not perfect, but it was mine, and I belonged there in a way I had never belonged anywhere else. The longer I stayed, the more the past resembled a distant nightmare. Sometimes it felt like Ray Reid existed in a separate universe entirely, one I had escaped by pure luck. His voice became a faint echo. His presence faded into a shape in my memory that no longer controlled me. At least, that was what I believed. Then the first voicemail came. It was 2 weeks before Christmas. I checked my phone during my lunch break and saw his name. I froze. My chest tightened. For a moment, I wondered if I had dialed the past by accident. But no, he had called me. I let it go to voicemail. His voice played through the speaker in the staff room, thick, slurred, barely masking the anger underneath. "You need to come home, Marley. We have unfinished business. You owe me that much." I deleted the message immediately, but the sound clung to me like a shadow. The calls continued. 3 the next day, 2 more that night. The following morning, a letter arrived at my apartment. I knew his handwriting instantly. Sharp, heavy, pressing too hard into the paper like every word was a demand. The letter was not long. Just a few sentences telling me to come home for Christmas, saying it might be the last time I would see him. Something about the phrasing pulled at the guilt he had planted in me as a child. Last time, last chance, last request. Trauma survivors know this trap well. The guilt hook, the illusion of obligation, the fear of regret. I took the letter to work and read it again behind the circulation desk. I told myself it was harmless to visit for one evening. I told myself I was older now, stronger, more stable. I told myself people change, that maybe he was lonely, that maybe he wanted to apologize. I even imagined sitting at the old dining table with him and having a civil conversation. Closure is a seductive fantasy for people raised in chaos. It promises healing while hiding the risk. The more I thought about that letter, the more it pulled at the old thread sewn into my chest that said, family is supposed to matter. But family only matters when it does not destroy you. I was not ready to admit that yet. On the morning of Christmas Eve, I packed a single bag. I brought a small gift for him, a book about local fishing spots in Missouri. It felt ironic to bring him something so gentle when he had never been gentle with me, but I wanted to believe the past could be softened even if only for a night. I also placed the folder for my new apartment inside the bag. I needed to stop by the storage unit in Coldwater to pick up my birth certificate, and I planned to leave early the next morning. My plan was simple. Arrive, eat dinner, sleep, leave. Clean cut. Closure delivered. Past completed. I even practiced what I would say if the conversation turned emotional. I rehearsed kindness boundaries, maturity. I rehearsed forgiveness because I thought I owed him that. The universe has a dark sense of humor when it comes to people like me. The more I convinced myself that I had control, the more clearly fate prepared to show me how wrong I was. Still, when I locked my apartment door behind me and stepped into the cold winter air, I felt hopeful. I felt steady. I felt like I was walking into a chapter I could handle. I had no idea that by the end of the night I would be lying on the floor of my childhood bedroom, bruised and terrified, wondering if morning would arrive fast enough to save my life. The drive into Coldwater felt like slipping through a crack in time into a place that had not changed even though I had. The same faded gas station sat at the town entrance, its sign missing the letter O, flickering like it had been tired since the 90s. The old church still stood on the corner with its chipped white steeple and the broken bench out front where kids used to carve initials. Every familiar landmark felt like a memory I had tried to bury but now had to confront. The closer I got to my childhood home, the harder my hands clenched around the steering wheel. Christmas lights decorated most of the houses along the street, bright colors glowing through the snow dusting the roofs. Families gathered around their living rooms. Kids played on porches. Dogs barked at passing cars. Coldwater looked peaceful from the outside. It always had. That was its trick. My father's house stood near the end of the street, sitting in the twilight like a relic from another era. The front porch sagged slightly in the middle. A few shingles were missing from the roof. The blue paint on the siding had faded almost to gray, but there were Christmas lights hanging from the porch railing, tangled and mismatched, glowing red and green in uneven pulses. He had never cared about decorating. My mother used to do that. After she died, the lights stayed up year after year, never taken down, never replaced. It was as if removing them would have meant admitting she was gone. When I parked, my heartbeat felt too loud in my ears. I forced myself to take a slow breath before stepping out of the car. The air smelled like pine and smoke, and something metallic that reminded me of the heater in my old bedroom. The lights flickered against the ice coating the steps as I walked up to the door. Before I could knock, the door opened. My father stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and a bottle in the other. His hair had thinned noticeably, and his beard was invading the creases around his mouth. He looked both smaller and larger than I remembered smaller physically, but larger in presence, like he had grown into the shape of his anger over the years. He looked at me as if trying to determine whether I was real or some ghost of the past come to haunt him. Then he smiled. It was not warm. It was not fatherly. It was a smile stretched by satisfaction, like my return validated him. "So you did come home after all?" His voice carried a gruffness sharpened by alcohol. I forced a smile back. "Just for Christmas Eve." He stepped back and gestured for me to come in. The warmth inside the house hit me like a wave, thick with the smell of sour beer and unwashed fabric. The living room still had the same brown carpet from my childhood. The recliner where my father always sat was positioned in front of the television, a dent in the cushion marking the exact shape of his body through the years. The coffee table held empty cans and an ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts. It felt like the house had been frozen in time. Everything preserved in the moment my mother died, except dirtier. I set my bag near the bottom of the stairs. He noticed immediately, but he said nothing about it yet. Instead, he pointed toward the dining room. "Dinner is ready. I cooked your favorites." That was the first warning. My father never cooked for me. Not once. But I followed him because the child in me still obeyed, even when the adult in me whispered that something felt off. The dining table was set with mismatched plates and silverware. A small ham sat in the center, along with green beans and mashed potatoes, the kind my mother used to make. For a second, an ache pressed against my ribs, a reminder of what Christmas had once meant before it became something to fear. We sat. My father poured himself a drink before touching any of the food. He watched me while he drank, eyes unblinking as if studying me. "You look different," he finally said. Older, softer. I tensed, unsure if it was a compliment or a criticism. Probably both. "Springfield must have been good to you." I nodded and told him a little about my job, my promotion, the new branch. He scoffed. "A librarian. Figures. You always liked hiding in books instead of facing the world." I swallowed the sting that tried to rise inside me. He chewed slowly, staring at me like every bite was part of a calculation. Then he put his fork down and leaned back. "You did not answer my calls." I explained that work had been busy, that I had planned to call back. He cut me off. "Liar. You ignored me." I felt the air shift. The room grew tighter, as if the walls had moved in. I kept my voice steady. "I needed space, Dad. It has been 7 years. I thought maybe we could just have dinner tonight." "Nothing more." His eyes narrowed. "You think you are too good now. You think you can walk away from family." My hands tightened around my napkin. "I do not think that. I just needed a life. A future." He slammed his hand on the table so hard the plates jumped. "You had a life here. You ran away. Like a coward." I did not respond. Silence was safer, but silence also fueled him. He grabbed his glass and drank again, his cheeks flushing deeper with every swallow. Then his gaze drifted toward the hallway where my bag sat near the stairs. He stood abruptly and walked toward it. My chest tightened with dread. He bent down, unzipped it, and pulled out the folder. The papers spilled out across the floor like feathers. What is this? His voice was low, almost calm, which was worse than his shouting. New apartment? St. Louis. You are moving away again, without saying a word to your father. I tried to approach him slowly. Dad, I can explain. He straightened and held the papers like evidence against me. Explain. Explain why you think you can just disappear again. Explain why you think I do not deserve respect. I felt my throat close. I had rehearsed standing my ground. I had rehearsed calm strength. But nothing prepared me for the look in his eyes. It was the same look he had when I was 17 the night I tried to run. Something snapped in him. Something that had waited years for this moment. He ripped the papers in half. My breath hitched. The sound echoed through the house like a warning siren. I stepped back, but he advanced, his voice rising with every step. You think you can leave. You think you are better than me, after everything I did for you. Everything I gave you. You owe me. Your life is because of me. The rage inside him grew like a storm. I tried to calm him. Dad, stop. Please, let us just sit down. It is Christmas. That was the wrong thing to say. Christmas was the day he hated most. Christmas was the day my mother always tried to leave him. He swung his hand out suddenly, knocking the lamp by the hallway off the table. It shattered across the floor. That sound made my pulse spike and instinct took over. I ran toward the stairs. He followed instantly. His footsteps thundered behind me. You are not leaving. You hear me. You will not walk out that door again. I reached the stairs, heart-pounding fingers gripping the banister. He grabbed the back of my sweater. I twisted free and stumbled upward 2 steps at a time, my vision blurring with panic. He kept shouting, his voice cracking through the hallway. I made it to the landing and bolted into my old bedroom. He reached me just as I crossed the threshold. He shoved me hard, and I fell onto the wooden floor. Before I could crawl away, he slammed the door shut, and I heard the metallic click of the latch he had installed years ago, the kind you could only lock from the outside. A sound that told me I was trapped. A sound I had not heard since I was 17. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed the room was the hallway light flickering, casting his shadow on the door. And then silence. Just me. Bruised. Alone. Locked in the same room where my childhood fear had been born. The moment the latch snapped into place, the air inside the room felt thinner, tighter, as if the walls themselves were remembering what they had witnessed years ago. I lay there on the wooden floor, ribs throbbing, cheek-burning heart racing so fast it made the edges of the room blur. I pushed myself up slowly, wincing at the stab of pain in my side. The house had settled into an eerie quiet. No footsteps, no shouting, just the faint hum of the old furnace below and the distant blinking of the Christmas lights outside the window. The silence did not comfort me. It warned me. My father never stayed quiet for long when he was angry. Quiet meant he was thinking, pacing, building towards something. I sat with my back against the wall, trying to control my breathing. My hands shook so violently, I tucked them beneath my legs to keep them still. I could almost hear my mother's voice from decades ago telling me to stay small, stay quiet, wait for him to tire out. But I was not a child anymore. I was not supposed to be sitting in this room with old posters peeling from the walls and the imprint of my teenage years haunting every shadow. I reached up and touched my cheek. It felt hot and swollen but not bleeding. I could move my jaw. The pain in my ribs was manageable if I stayed still. For a brief moment, I considered banging on the door, yelling for help, screaming loud enough for the neighbors to hear. But then I remembered the distance between our house and theirs, the thick winter air, the way sound never seemed to travel past the porch. And even if it did, who would hear me? Who would come? Nobody had ever come before. The floor creaked downstairs. Then another creak. Then a heavy thud. He was moving. I froze. His footsteps dragged across the living room slow and uneven, like he was picking up objects, setting them down, muttering to himself. A familiar dread washed over me. He had entered the stage of his anger where he talked to the walls, accusing them of betrayal, screaming at invisible enemies. He always did that before he turned violent again. I crawled closer to the door and pressed my ear against it. At first, I heard only muffled noises. Then, his voice cut through harsh and slurred. She thinks she is better than me. She thinks she can run. Again. Again. The last word echoed with a bitterness that made my skin crawl. He was reliving the night I tried to leave at 17. Back then he had told me running made me weak, that only cowards tried to escape, that I would always come back because I had nowhere else to go. For years I believed him. Tonight he wanted to make me believe it again. A loud crash erupted below. Something heavy hit the floor. Maybe the coffee table, maybe a chair, maybe both. Then came another crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. I jumped, despite myself, heart lurching into my throat. He was breaking things. That meant he was escalating. He always escalated before laying hands on me again. I backed away from the door, scanning the room in the dim moonlight. The bedroom looked exactly as I had left it years ago. A twin bed shoved against the wall. A desk with a broken drawer. A bookshelf missing half its books. Dust coated the surfaces like a thin layer of neglect. The only new item was the metal latch on the outside of the door, the one he claimed he installed to keep me safe after Mom died. I knew then, and I know now, that it was a lie. It had always been about control. I checked the window, but it was painted shut. The paint cracked from decades of winters, but still strong enough to resist my attempts to lift it. The drop to the ground was 2 stories, possible but dangerous in my condition. His footsteps moved toward the stairs. Each step creaked under his weight as he climbed slowly, deliberately. My breath hitched with each creak. He was coming back. I moved to the corner farthest from the door, curling into myself, not because I wanted to, but because survival instincts, sharpened by years of fear, took over. The footsteps stopped right outside the bedroom. He stood there breathing heavily, the sound loud enough to seep through the crack under the door. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he slammed his fist against the door so hard the frame rattled. "You think you can leave me. You think you can pack your bags and walk out of my life again." I flinched at the impact. Another slam followed, and another. The wood groaned under the force. I covered my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. After a moment, he stopped pounding and began talking instead, voice low, trembling with rage. "I gave you everything. I kept a roof over your head. I fed you. I clothed you. You owe me. You owe me your life." He kicked the bottom of the door, the vibration traveling through the floorboards. My ribs pulsed painfully. "You moved to St. Louis and forget your own father. You think you can just turn your back on me." His tone changed, suddenly softening in the way that always terrified me most. "Come on, Marley. Just open the door. We can talk. Everything will be fine. Just open the door." I closed my eyes tighter because I remembered that version of him, the coaxing voice, the pretend softness, the bait. He only used that tone when planning something worse. When I did not answer, he laughed. It was a sound without joy, broken and jagged like shattered glass. "You are just like your mother, always running, always thinking you deserve more than this." I felt the sting of his words, not because they were true, but because they were familiar. He had used them on my mother before she died, twisting her desire for a better life into an insult. His footsteps shifted outside the door, and I heard something metallic drag across the floor. My stomach twisted. The sound repeated. Something heavy. Something he picked up. Then he struck the door with it. The entire frame shook. I gasped and scrambled backward on instinct. He hit it again, and again. Wood splintered near the hinges. If he kept going, the door would give out. I pressed myself against the opposite wall, hands shaking uncontrollably. "Please stop, please stop," I whispered under my breath, even though I knew he could not hear me and would not care if he did. The pounding stopped abruptly. Silence. Long, heavy silence. The kind that blankets a room in dread. Then I heard him mutter to himself, retreating down the hall. His steps were uneven, staggering, growing distant. Something thudded against the hallway wall. He was drunk enough that anger and clumsiness blurred together. Eventually, the noise drifted toward the living room, then faded entirely. I did not move for several minutes after the sounds disappeared. I did not trust the quiet. I did not trust anything in that house. After what felt like an hour but was likely only a few minutes, I crawled to the door and pressed my ear against it. Nothing. No footsteps. No muttering. No breathing. Just stillness. He had passed out. I could picture it. He would be on the couch, one hand still wrapped around the bottle, the television playing static or some late-night commercial. I backed away from the door and sat on the cold floor. My body throbbed with every breath, but inside me, something steadier began to form. Not calm, not confidence. Something sharper, something focused. A single thought that cut through the fear. I needed to get out. Not later. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Before he woke up again. The room felt smaller as the night stretched on, as if every hour that passed tightened the walls around me. I stayed on the floor for a long time after the last sound of my father's footsteps disappeared, too afraid to trust the silence, too aware of how quickly quiet could turn violent. The air in the bedroom smelled stale, heavy with dust and the faint trace of old perfume that my mother used to keep on the dresser. The moonlight through the window left a pale streak across the floor, just enough illumination to make out the shapes of furniture that had not moved since I was a teenager. The twin bed, the chipped dresser, the bookshelf missing half its shelves, all frozen in time, like pieces of a childhood I had tried to forget. My ribs throbbed with a dull rhythm each time I breathed. My cheek had begun to swell, the heat radiating across my face. I shifted slowly, trying to find a position that did not pull at my bruised side. The cold floor seeped through my clothes, making me shiver, but I did not dare climb onto the bed because the bed springs squeaked, and any sound might bring him back up the stairs. I kept reminding myself to listen, to stay alert, to keep my breathing soft. It felt as though the house itself held its breath with me. For a while, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who slept in this room and hid in the closet whenever my father started yelling downstairs. The one who flinched at the sound of footsteps because she never knew what they meant. I thought I left her behind in Coldwater 7 years ago. But sitting there on the floor that night, clutching my aching ribs, I felt her return, small and trembling inside the person I had grown into. It terrified me, not because I hated her, but because I realized she had never truly left. I closed my eyes and tried to steady myself. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Quiet. Controlled. I repeated the rhythm until my mind stopped spiraling. A few minutes passed, then a few more. Eventually, I crawled toward the door and pressed my ear against it again. Nothing. Not even the sound of his breathing or the creak of the couch. The house was heavy with the weight of someone passed out deeply, the kind of drunk sleep that could swallow hours. My heart began to slow a little. Not calm, but something close enough to let me think. I needed to get out. That thought repeated itself over and over, hammering through the fear. I looked around the room, scanning every corner. The door was heavy old wood, reinforced by a metal latch on the outside. I remembered when he installed it, claiming it was for my safety after Mom died. But even then, I knew the truth. He liked having the power to lock me in. My fingers traced the cold surface of the door. The hinges were on the inside. That gave me one small advantage. The screws looked rusted, the paint around them cracked. The house had not been cared for in years. My father never fixed anything he did not feel like fixing, and now his neglect might save me. I moved slowly toward the small bookshelf and pulled out the bottom drawer, but it was too wide to use as a tool. The desk had a metal frame, but the screws holding the drawer handle were too tight to remove without making noise. My eyes drifted to the bed. It was old. Metal frame. Probably still held together with the same screws from when I slept in it at 17. I slid toward it on my knees, careful not to let the frame scrape the floor. The mattress sagged in the middle when I leaned against it. I reached underneath and felt along the metal slats until my fingers brushed against a loose rod, part of the frame support. I tugged gently. It shifted. I froze, listening for any movement from downstairs. Silence. I pulled again. Harder. The metal scraped softly against the frame, and the rod came free in my hands. It was thin, about a foot long, slightly bent at one end, not sharp, but sturdy. My pulse quickened. I crawled back to the door and positioned myself near the hinge. The screws were old and rusted. If I could pry under the hinge plate, I might be able to loosen it. Not enough to remove the door completely, but enough to weaken the frame. I wedged the bent end of the metal rod under the lower hinge and pushed. It resisted at first, then groaned softly. I froze, waited, listened. Nothing. I pushed again, carefully applying pressure with both hands. The hinge shifted just slightly enough for the rust to crack. A tiny flake of metal dropped to the floor. I held my breath. The house remained silent. I kept working inch by inch, using every sliver of strength in my arms. Time became strange. Minutes felt like hours. My hands ached. My wrists throbbed. But the hinge began to loosen. Not enough to break free, but enough to weaken the structure. I moved to the upper hinge and repeated the same motions. It was harder. The metal was deeper in the wood, but the frame was old, the door older, and neglect had done half the job for me. I worked until my arms trembled. Then I stopped to rest, leaning my forehead against the cool wood. The room felt even colder now. A draft slipped through a crack in the window frame, chilling the sweat on my skin. My side pulsed with pain every time I took a breath. A part of me wondered if I should wait until morning, until the sun rose and neighbors woke and the world outside felt less dangerous. But morning felt impossibly far away, and there was no guarantee he would stay asleep that long. I could not risk giving him another chance to hurt me. After a few minutes of rest, I resumed working on the hinges. Every shift of the metal made my heart race, every tiny crack in the wood made me flinch. But the door began to tilt slightly inward at the top corner. Not enough to open, but enough to slip something thin through the gap. I glanced around the room again, searching for anything else I could use. My eyes landed on a stack of old paperbacks on the floor. Behind them, a thin metal bookmark poked out. I grabbed it. The metal was flexible but narrow enough to slide between the door and frame. I slipped it through the gap and felt for the latch. The angle was terrible. My fingers cramped as I twisted it gently upward. The latch moved a fraction of an inch. My breath quickened. I kept going, small movements, slow and deliberate. Sweat dripped down my temple despite the cold. Every muscle in my body tightened with effort. Another shift. Another tremor. The latch lifted again. Not much, but enough for hope to spark in my chest. Then the house creaked. A deep, echoing groan from somewhere below. I froze. My heart stopped. I listened hard for any sign of movement from my father. Silence. After a long moment, I resumed. The bookmark slid higher under the latch. My fingers cramped harder. My ribs screamed. But I kept going. Then I heard it. A soft click. The latch moved upward just enough for the tension to release. The door cracked open by the width of 2 fingernails. Not much, but enough. My chest swelled with a trembling breath. I had done it. I had opened the first barrier. But getting out of the room was only the beginning. There was still a hallway, a staircase, a living room where my father lay passed out, and the front door that had more locks than when I lived here last. I pushed the door open very slowly, inch by inch, until the gap was wide enough for me to slip through. The hallway was dark, cold, silent. I stepped into it, every nerve in my body electric. Freedom was somewhere downstairs, and I had one chance to reach it before he woke. The hallway felt colder than the bedroom, as if the temperature dropped the moment I stepped outside that door. I stood still for several seconds, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of the Christmas decorations outside the living room window, bleeding weak colors into the lower part of the staircase. My heartbeat thudded loudly in my ears, and I was terrified it might be loud enough to wake him. I took a cautious step forward, the old floorboard groaning beneath my weight. I froze instantly, breath caught in my throat. No movement came from below, no shifting, no voice. Just silence and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I continued down the hallway, brushing my fingers lightly against the wall to steady myself. Every few steps I paused to listen, making sure my father was still passed out. When I reached the top of the stairs, I crouched slightly and peeked down into the living room. The television flickered dimly with a late-night infomercial. My father lay sprawled on the couch, head tilted back, mouth open, one arm hanging off the side. The bottle lay on the rug beneath his fingers. His chest rose and fell in heavy, uneven breaths. The image should have made me feel relieved, but seeing him like that, even unconscious, sent a sharp bolt of fear through me. I knew how quickly he could snap awake, especially if startled. I placed one foot on the top stair, slowly shifting my weight until the board held steady with only the faintest creak. Then, the next step. Then, the next. Every descent felt like crossing a minefield. Halfway down the third stair, groaned unexpectedly. My heart jumped to my throat. I pressed myself against the railing, listening hard. My father stirred slightly, shifting his weight and mumbling something incoherent, then settled again. Relief washed over me in a shaky wave. I waited several seconds before taking another step. When I reached the bottom, I crouched low behind the railing, watching him closely. His breathing remained slow and heavy. I scanned the living room for anything that could trip me or make noise. The broken lamp, the shredded papers, the fallen picture frames, the coffee table turned sideways. The room looked like a storm had torn through it, and I was desperate not to be caught in its aftermath. The front door was 10 feet away, but it felt like miles. There were 2 locks, a deadbolt and an old chain latch he added the year after I left home. I remembered him telling the neighbors it was for safety. It was not. It was for control. I moved toward the door on the balls of my feet, keeping low, steady quiet. Each step felt like an eternity, my breath shallow as I approached the lock. I reached out and gripped the deadbolt between my fingers, turning it slowly. The metal resisted stiff from lack of use. My hand trembled as I applied pressure. It shifted slightly, then more. A tiny click echoed in the silence. I winced. My father shifted on the couch again. I froze, eyes locked on him, heart pounding. He did not wake. I let out a slow breath, then lifted the chain latch with trembling fingers. This one was trickier, prone to squeaking if lifted too quickly. I moved it millimeter by millimeter. The chain lifted silently until the last link slipped free. The latch hung loose. And then the front door finally was only held shut by the weight of the winter air pressing against it. My hand wrapped around the doorknob. I turned it gently. The latch clicked. Too loud. My father grumbled something under his breath. I stopped breathing. The room felt frozen, as if time itself refused to move. After a long moment, he resumed, snoring deep and heavy. I exhaled through my nose, barely a whisper. Slowly, carefully, I pushed the door open. The cold morning air rushed in, stinging my face and filling my lungs with a clarity so sharp it hurt. Dawn had begun to break, a pale gray line slicing through the horizon. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, settling on the porch in thin patches. The world outside was quiet, peaceful, untouched by the chaos behind me. I stepped onto the porch, letting the door close behind me with the softest click. I did not dare run until I was off the property. My ribs ached with each breath, but adrenaline pushed me forward as I walked down the steps and onto the snow-dusted sidewalk. At the end of the driveway, I glanced back at the house, at the sagging porch and the flickering lights. It looked harmless from the outside, a lie wrapped in wood and paint. I turned away and hurried toward Mrs. Dalton's house 3 doors down. She was the only neighbor who ever looked at me with something other than pity or judgment. She once slipped me cookies when I was little and told me quietly that I deserved kindness. I reached her porch and knocked lightly at first, then harder panic rising in my chest. A light flicked on inside. Footsteps approached. The door opened a crack and her face appeared behind it, her silver hair messy from sleep. Marley. Her voice softened instantly, worry overtaking confusion. "Honey, what happened?" I could not form words. I could barely whisper. "Please, call 911. She opened the door wider, her expression shifting from concern to alarm as she saw the bruises spreading across my cheek and the way I held my ribs. She guided me inside with gentle hands. "Sit down. Do not move. I am calling now." While she spoke to the dispatcher, I sat on her couch, shaking uncontrollably. The warmth of her house wrapped around me like a blanket. For the first time in hours, I felt safe enough to breathe without fear of footsteps behind me. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens cut through the quiet morning air. I closed my eyes as the sound grew louder, knowing help was finally coming. I had escaped. I was alive. but part of me knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The flashing lights outside Mrs. Dalton's window painted the walls in streaks of red and blue, pulsing softly against the floral wallpaper. I sat hunched on her couch, arms wrapped around my ribs, trying to steady the tremor in my breath. My clothes were cold from the early morning air, and every shift of my weight sent a jolt of pain through my side. Mrs. Dalton stayed close, hovering protectively, one hand on my shoulder, as if she could anchor me to something stable after a night of nothing but chaos. The knock on the door was firm, but not aggressive. "Police! Open up!" Her voice shook slightly as she called back that the door was unlocked. 2 officers entered, one tall, with a calm face. The other, younger eyes, sharp and alert. They took in the scene quickly. Both of them looked at me with a mixture of concern and something else I recognized from years of reading people's reactions. Recognition. They had seen women like me before, victims who escaped just in time. The taller officer crouched in front of me, keeping his movements slow. "Ma'am, I am Officer Hayes. You are safe here. Can you tell me your name?" My throat felt thick, but I managed to whisper, "Marley. Marley Reed." He nodded, gaze steady and gentle. "Marley, we received a call about an assault. Are you hurt anywhere besides your face and ribs?" I hesitated. My entire body ached, but nothing felt broken except the parts of me that had been breaking for years. "I think my side, my back maybe." He nodded again, taking notes. "We have medics on the way. I want you to stay seated. Do you know where the person who hurt you is right now?" I swallowed hard. "Asleep, on the couch, at the house down the street." He lifted his eyes toward the younger officer who was already moving toward the door. "Stay here," he told me. "We will handle him." The idea of them going into that house sent a shiver through me, even though I knew they were trained for far worse. Ray was unpredictable when drunk. He could be violent. He could be cunning. He could be both. But the officers seemed confident, and the calm way they spoke settled the knot in my stomach just enough to keep me from spiraling. Outside, more lights approached. An ambulance stopped in front of the house, and 2 EMTs stepped out carrying bags and a portable monitor. They came in quickly, gently, and got to work with the kind of efficiency that made me feel simultaneously fragile and protected. They asked questions I answered through short breaths. Any loss of consciousness? Any nausea? Any trouble breathing? I obeyed when they helped me onto the stretcher, the movement painful but careful. As they transported me to the ambulance, I caught a glimpse of my house, 3 doors down. The front door hung open. Police lights bounced off the frosted windows. I could not see inside, but I could imagine the scene. My father waking groggily to unfamiliar voices, his confusion turning to anger. The officers ordering him to stay seated, him refusing, him shouting, the struggle that would follow. The EMT secured the straps lightly across my chest and legs. "You're going to be okay, ma'am. Just breathe." I let my head rest against the pillow as the ambulance doors closed. The siren blared, slicing through the quiet morning. Coldwater was slowly waking, but the world still felt half asleep as we rushed toward the nearest hospital. The ride was bumpy, and each jolt pulled at my ribs, making me suck in air through clenched teeth. One of the EMTs adjusted an oxygen tube under my nose and checked my vitals. Bruising on the left ribs. Possible fracture. "We will know more after the X-rays. You are safe now." That word kept coming back. Safe, safe, safe. I repeated it silently, even though my mind argued with it. Safety was a foreign language, something I had only ever spoken in borrowed moments. The hospital came into view, its bright lights slicing through the dawn. They wheeled me inside through sliding doors that hissed open. Nurses rushed toward us. Questions flew around me in a blur. How did this happen? What is your pain level? Can you stand? Can you move your fingers? I answered what I could, though my thoughts felt foggy. The fluorescent lights overhead were too bright. The antiseptic smell burned my nose. A nurse with kind eyes took my hand. "We are taking you to imaging shortly. You are doing great. Just keep breathing." They moved me into a curtained room in the emergency department. Machines beeped softly. A blood pressure cuff tightened around my arm. A doctor arrived, a middle-aged woman with a steady voice. "Marley, I am Dr. Whitman. We are going to make sure you are all right. I understand you were assaulted. Can you tell me what happened? The question made my chest tighten. My tongue felt heavy, my throat dry. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. She nodded as if she expected that. That is okay. We will come back to it. Right now, we need to assess your injuries. A nurse lifted my shirt slightly to check the bruising. Purplish marks bloomed across my ribs and stomach, darkening by the minute. I could not look at them without feeling sick. The doctor pressed gently on my side. I gasped, arching away. Sorry, I know it hurts. We will take x-rays to check for fractures. For now, I am giving you something for the pain. A warm sensation spread through my body as the medication entered my IV. Some of the tension melted from my muscles. My breathing slowed. My thoughts grew a little clearer. A few minutes later, a radiology tech arrived to take me for imaging. They wheeled me down a long hallway lined with Christmas decorations that felt painfully cheerful against everything I was feeling. A wreath hung on the wall near the imaging room, red ribbons bright against the sterile white. The contrast made my throat tighten again. After what felt like forever, they finished the x-rays and returned me to the curtained room. Dr. Whitman came back with the results. Good news. No broken ribs, but you have deep bruising and a mild concussion. You will need rest, and someone to stay with you for at least 24 hours. I closed my eyes. I had nobody here except co-workers and acquaintances. No family, no partner, no close friends who lived nearby. But before I could worry, she added gently, "Do not stress about that yet. We can help." A nurse handed me a small cup of water. I sipped slowly, wincing as the cool liquid hit my sore throat. A few minutes later, the curtain swished open again. It was Officer Hayes. He stepped inside, his expression softening when he saw me. "How are you feeling?" I swallowed carefully. Sore, but alive. His jaw tightened slightly at the word alive, like he had pictured the alternative and did not like it. "We have your father in custody." My stomach knotted. He fought us at first. Tried to deny everything, but when we found the room you were locked in, it backed up your statement. He paused. He is being held on suspicion of domestic assault and unlawful restraint. Hearing it spoken aloud sent a strange chill through me. Confirmation, evidence, proof that what happened was real and not just another nightmare I would try to rationalize. "We will need your full statement when you are ready," he continued, "but not now. Rest first." The nurse stepped closer. "She can be discharged in a few hours if things stay stable, but she will need somewhere safe to go." Officer Hayes nodded. "We can arrange a ride back to the neighbor's house if she agrees, and we will file an emergency protective order today." A protective order. The words washed over me like warm water. Something inside me loosened just a little. Not safety, but the possibility of it. As the officer prepared to leave, he paused at the curtain and looked back at me. "You did the hardest thing already. You got out." Those words were simple, but they landed deep. When he left, the curtain swayed behind him, and I lay back against the pillow, exhaustion heavy but no longer terrifying. For the first time in years, maybe in my entire life, I felt the tiniest spark of certainty. I was not going back to that house. Not tonight. Not ever again. The hospital room felt quieter after Officer Hayes left, but the silence no longer felt dangerous. It felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath while I tried to remember how to breathe without fear tightening my chest. I lay there listening to the soft beeps of the monitor beside my bed, the distant shuffle of nurses moving down the hallway, the muted hum of Christmas music playing from a speaker at the nurses' station. Even the cheerful sounds made me shiver. Everything felt too bright, too clean, too far removed from the night I had escaped. A nurse returned to check my vitals, adjusting the cuff around my arm gently. "Blood pressure is better," she said. "Pain level." I took a slow breath. 5 or 6, she nodded. "The medication is helping then. We will keep monitoring." She left the curtain open slightly when she walked away, letting the warm glow of the hallway filter into my little space. The soft light made me feel less trapped, less alone. But as the minutes passed, I began to worry about what came next. Medical tests were simple. Healing was simple. But dealing with my father, the law, the aftermath of everything he had done, felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with no idea what was below me. When the curtain swished again, I expected the nurse, but instead it was a woman in a gray blazer holding a leather folder tucked under her arm. She was in her 50s, her hair clipped neatly behind one ear, her expression steady but kind. Marley Reed. My name sounded different in her voice. Professional. I nodded. She stepped closer and introduced herself. I am Assistant Public Defender Caroline Mercer. The hospital contacted our office because you might need legal support. I stared at her confused. I had expected a detective or another officer. Someone in uniform, not a lawyer. She seemed to understand the confusion. Because your father is in custody and because there are signs of prolonged abuse, the county is taking this very seriously. She pulled a chair next to my bed and sat down. I am here to help you navigate what happens next. My stomach tightened with equal parts fear and relief. What happens next? She opened the folder revealing forms, printed photos, and what looked like a handwritten report. First, she said gently, "We need your consent to collect medical documentation of your injuries. The hospital will file an official report, but we need your signature so it can be used as evidence." Evidence. The word made my skin prickle. My father had always talked about the world as if it were something he controlled. He made his own truth. He decided what happened. He rewrote memories to suit himself. But now there were papers, doctors, officials, and all of them were documenting what he had done. For the first time, the truth belonged to me. I nodded slowly. She handed me a pen. My hand trembled as I signed the form, the simple motion feeling heavier than it should. "Good," Caroline said. "The next part might be difficult. I need you to tell me exactly what happened last night. The bruises, the confinement, anything he said or did." My heart pounded. My fingers dug into the blanket. She noticed and softened her voice. "We can take it slow. Or we can take breaks. Whatever you need." The words stuck in my throat at first. But slowly, piece by piece, I forced myself to tell her everything. The dinner, the anger brewing behind his eyes, the way he had grabbed my bag and torn open the folder, the shouting, the slap, the fall, the kicks, the door slamming, the latch clicking. The hours locked at the darkness. As I spoke, she wrote notes calmly, her expression never changing into pity or judgment. When I finished, she placed her pen down and met my eyes. "What your father did is felony assault and unlawful restraint. You understand that?" I swallowed. "Yes." And because of the prior complaints from neighbors over the years, including 2 documented disturbances, the case against him is strong. Complaints. The word hit me like cold water. I remembered voices through the walls, raised tones from the porch. The night he screamed at Mrs. Leonard for parking too close to our driveway. The time he punched the mailbox. So people knew. People saw things. But nobody stepped in. Maybe they were afraid just like I had been. Caroline continued, "We will need the voicemails he left you, and any letters, anything that shows a history of control threats or coercion." I reached for my phone on the bedside table, my hand shaking as I unlocked it. The missed calls stared back at me like ghosts, the voicemails, the saved texts from years ago. I handed the phone to her. She scrolled through, carefully listening to 1 or 2 messages with a pair of earbuds she carried in her bag. After a moment, she exhaled softly. "These are strong." His tone, the threats, the pressure to return home. "It paints a clear picture." My chest tightened with a strange mixture of relief and grief. I had kept those messages because part of me was too afraid to delete them, afraid something worse would follow. Now they were evidence. Evidence against the man who had raised me. Evidence of the truth I had lived inside for decades. Caroline placed the phone back on the table and opened another file. "There is more. Your neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, already provided a statement. She told officers she heard yelling last night and has heard it in the past. She also said she has seen you bruised before as a teenager." My breath caught. She noticed. All those years ago when she slipped cookies into my hands, when she asked if I was all right, when she lingered a little too long at the fence every time my father yelled. She noticed, Caroline continued. "With her testimony, your medical records, your statement, and the evidence from your phone, your case is very strong. My father will deny everything. He will blame me. He will twist it all." The attorney nodded. "He already did. He tried telling officers you attacked him. that you were unstable, that he was defending himself. I closed my eyes. Of course he would. He had practiced rewriting reality my entire life. But Caroline was not shaken. They do not believe him. The physical evidence contradicts everything he said. The latch on the outside of your door, the damage to the hinges, the bruise patterns, the overturned furniture. Your father was drunk and aggressive when they arrived. He made it worse for himself. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt sick. It was strange grieving the downfall of someone who had hurt me so deeply, but trauma creates strange loyalties. Even now, part of me felt like a traitor for telling the truth. Caroline leaned in slightly. I know this is overwhelming, but listen to me. What happened to you is not your fault, and someone like your father does not change unless forced by the system. She paused, letting the words settle. This is where you finally get protection. You survived him. That alone says more about your strength than you realize. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. Not from pain, from recognition, from being seen clearly for the first time. The curtain rustled again, and Officer Hayes stepped inside quietly. He held a small evidence bag in his hand. Marley, we recovered something from your father's house. Items damaged during the altercation. We would like your confirmation. He opened the bag, slightly revealing torn papers. My rental agreement, my new address, my future. I nodded. Yes, he tore those. Hayes nodded and sealed the bag again. We also photographed the latch on your door and took statements from the neighbors. Everything supports your account. I felt something shift inside me, something heavy and long buried. Proof, evidence, validation. After years of fear, someone was finally listening. Someone believed me. Hayes continued. Once you are discharged, we will escort you back to retrieve your belongings if needed, and we already filed for an emergency protective order. It will be in effect today. I stared at him, the words echoing in my mind like a miracle I had not dared hope for. Today. Protection. Today. As he stepped away, Caroline placed her hand gently over mine. This is the beginning of your freedom, but it is also the beginning of justice, and you are no longer alone in this. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe her. The courthouse in Coldwater looked smaller than I remembered, a squat brick building with narrow windows and a flag that barely stirred in the winter breeze. When the patrol car pulled into the parking lot, my stomach twisted so sharply I had to grip the edge of the seat to steady myself. Even the sight of the building made old fear crawl up my spine. Officer Hayes glanced back at me from the driver's seat. You do not have to see him until you are inside, and you are not walking in alone. His reassurance softened the ice inside my chest, but only slightly. Today was the preliminary hearing. Just enough testimony and evidence to determine whether charges would stick. Just enough confrontation to rip open everything I had endured, not just last night, but for most of my life. The patrol car parked near the entrance. Hayes opened my door gently, offering an arm I reluctantly accepted. My ribs still ached with every movement, and the cold morning air bit sharply against the bruises on my face. People glanced at me as we walked in. Some recognized me from years ago. Others stared because they saw the visible violence written across my skin. I tried to keep my head steady, my breathing measured each step, taking me toward the life I had finally chosen for myself. Inside the courthouse was warm, buzzing with holiday decorations and muted conversations. A small Christmas tree stood near the clerk's desk, its lights blinking cheerfully in stark contrast to the heaviness in my chest. Caroline Mercer waited near the security checkpoint, her blazer neat, her expression steady. She walked toward us the moment she saw me. Are you ready? The honest answer was no, but I nodded anyway. She placed a hand briefly on my shoulder. Remember, you do not have to be strong for anyone in there. You just have to be honest. And we already have more evidence than most domestic cases ever see. We passed through security and made our way down the hallway to courtroom 3. A deputy stood guard outside the door, arms folded, face stern. He nodded to Officer Hayes, then glanced at me with a sympathetic flicker in his eyes. Inside the room was half full. A few townspeople sat in the back rows, curious spectators who seemed to treat courthouse hearings like morning entertainment. On the left side of the room sat my father. Seeing him again hit me harder than any bruise he had left on my skin. He was sober, hair combed back, wearing the same gray jacket he had worn to church years ago when Mom was alive. But sobriety could not soften the bitterness in his eyes. He glared at me the moment I entered, and for a split second my body reacted the way it always had. Shoulders tensed, breath shallow, heart racing. But then I noticed something else. He was seated between two deputies, wrists cuffed. The sight snapped something inside me. He could not reach me. Not today. Not ever again. Caroline guided me to our table on the right. "Sit straight," she whispered. "Do not look at him unless you want to. You are in control of your attention." The judge entered, hammering the gavel lightly. "All rise." We stood. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a firm presence, took her seat. "Be seated. Case number 24, 1937. State of Missouri versus Raymond Reed. Domestic assault, unlawful restraint, and resisting arrest." The judge surveyed the room. "Let us proceed." The prosecutor, a young man with crisp posture and precise diction, stood first. "Your Honor, the state calls Officer Hayes." My pulse quickened as Hayes took the stand. He placed a hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, then settled into the witness chair. He detailed everything with professional calm. The 911 call, the condition they found me in, the locked bedroom door with the latch mounted on the exterior, the damage to the hinges that indicated forced confinement, the overturned furniture, the open bottle, my father's aggression, his attempts to resist arrest, each word carved deeper into the room's silence. My father shook his head repeatedly, muttering under his breath until the judge shot him a warning glance. Next, the prosecutor called the EMT who treated me in the ambulance. She described my injuries without dramatics: bruising along the ribs consistent with blunt force trauma, facial swelling, symptoms of concussion, elevated heart rate due to fear and pain. Hearing it all recited clinically made my throat tighten. I stared at my hands to avoid falling apart. Then came the moment I had dreaded. The state calls Marley Reed. My breath caught. Caroline touched my elbow lightly. "You can do this." The walk to the witness stand felt unbearably long. When I sat down, the wooden chair creaked softly. The bailiff approached. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" I swallowed. "I do." The prosecutor offered a small, encouraging nod before beginning. "Marley, can you describe what happened on the night of December 24th? My voice shook at first, but I kept going. I told the court about dinner, about the anger simmering beneath his questions, about him grabbing my bag, tearing up my papers, slapping me, kicking me, dragging me toward the stairs, locking me inside my childhood bedroom. As I spoke, something unexpected happened. I found my voice steadying, my breath lengthening, my spine straightening. Each detail I shared felt like reclaiming a piece of myself he had stolen. When I finished, the courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Thank you, Miss Reed." The prosecutor sat. It was now my father's attorney's turn. A man in a suit too expensive for someone defending my father's kind of case. He walked toward me with a friendly smile that did not reach his eyes. "Miss Reed," he said smoothly, "you and your father have a complicated history, do you not?" I kept my gaze steady. "Yes." He stepped closer. "And would you say your relationship has been strained?" "Yes." "And before last night, when was the last time you spoke to him?" 7 years ago." He nodded as if confirming something. 7 years of silence. 7 years of no contact. 7 years in which perhaps memories became clouded, pain exaggerated. I stared at him, stunned. "Are you suggesting I imagined the bruises? The latch on the outside of the door, the medical report, the police photos." I did not mean that, he said quickly, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I only mean that trauma can distort." I cut him off. "Trauma does not distort locked doors and broken ribs." The judge raised an eyebrow at my interruption, but she did not reprimand me. The attorney tried a different angle. "Miss Reed, is it possible that you initiated the altercation, that you upset your father by provoking him?" Laughter rippled from the back of the room before the judge silenced it with a glare. I inhaled slowly. No, he continued. Did you drink alcohol that evening? No. Did you raise your voice? No. Did you attack him? Absolutely not. He paused, sensing he was losing ground. But you admit you came to his home carrying documents, showing your intent to move away, leaving him without warning. My chest tightened. My decisions are my own. He does not own me. The attorney opened his mouth again, but the judge lifted her hand. I think we have heard enough. Sit down. His face flushed as he hurried back to his seat. Finally, the judge turned to my father. Mr. Reed, do you wish to address the court before I make my ruling? My father stood eyes dark with resentment. Lies, he spat. All lies. She has always been dramatic, always trying to make me look like a monster. I never touched her. She fell. She locks herself in that room all the time. The courtroom murmured at his incoherence. The judge watched him with cool detachment. Mr. Reed, we have photographic evidence of the latch mounted outside the door. Witness testimony, medical reports, voicemails you left threatening her, and evidence of property damage consistent with violent behavior. He opened his mouth to argue again, but she spoke over him. And your aggressive behavior during arrest was captured on an officer's body camera. The courtroom doors opened suddenly. A deputy entered with a laptop. The judge nodded. Play the footage. The screen flickered to life, showing the moment officers entered our house. My father shouting refusing commands, swaying with drunken rage, insisting he had done nothing wrong while the living room lay trashed around him. The evidence was undeniable. When the video ended, the judge straightened. Based on the overwhelming evidence, I am ordering the following. Her voice rang clearly through the room. Raymond Reed, you are hereby remanded without bail pending trial. You are subject to an immediate and permanent no-contact order regarding your daughter Marley Reed. You may not call her, approach her, visit her, or attempt to communicate through any third party. My father lunged forward before deputies grabbed him. This is my daughter. She belongs to me. The words echoed like a final declaration of a kingdom collapsing. Deputies twisted his arms behind his back cuffs, clinking sharply. They dragged him toward the door as he shouted incoherently, his voice cracking his anger, fracturing into something desperate and pathetic. The courtroom watched. The truth was no longer hidden inside a small battered house. It was displayed for everyone to see, public, clear, undeniable, and I felt something inside me break free. Not relief, not joy, something quieter. Something steadier. Liberation. The weeks after the hearing passed in a blur of winter light, soft snow, and the quiet unraveling of a life I had been forced to carry for far too long. For the first time in years, the days did not revolve around waiting for the next phone call, the next unexpected knock, the next ripple of fear that used to travel down my spine whenever I saw an unknown number or heard heavy footsteps on a porch. Instead, life began to unfold slowly, gently, like thawing ice. I returned to Springfield after the doctors cleared me for travel. The drive home felt unreal. The world looked the same as it had before Christmas, but I did not. I caught my reflection in the rental car window several times, noting the fading bruises, the healing scar above my brow, and the exhaustion beneath my eyes. But there was something else there, too. A quiet sort of determination, a steadiness. A person I did not recognize but had wanted to become for years. When I entered my little apartment above the laundromat, a familiar smell greeted me, a mixture of laundry soap books and the lavender candle I had forgotten to blow out properly before leaving town. The place felt small but safe. Safe was new. I sank onto the couch, wrapped myself in a blanket, and let my body soften into the cushions. For the first time since childhood, I fell asleep without listening for footsteps in the hall. When I returned to the library the following Monday, the building felt different too. The warm hum of fluorescent lights, the whisper of pages, turning the familiar creak of the circulation desk, all felt like parts of a world that had waited patiently for me to return. My coworkers gasped when they saw me, worry filling their faces. They asked what happened, but I could not bring myself to share the details. Not yet. They did not push. People who work in libraries know how to treat silence with respect. Instead, they made me tea, covered my afternoon shifts, and walked a little closer beside me than usual. In the quiet moments between helping patrons, I found myself glancing at the windows, half expecting to see my father's truck. Old instincts die slowly, but fear no longer clenched at my ribs the way it once had. Whenever it rose, it dissolved again, replaced by the echo of the judge's ruling. No contact. Permanent. One afternoon, while shelving books in the local history section, I felt a presence near me. When I turned, Officer Hayes stood at the end of the aisle, holding a paper bag. He looked slightly out of place among the shelves, but not uncomfortable. "I brought something for you," he said. He handed me the bag. Inside was a small stack of homemade cookies wrapped in plastic, each one slightly misshapen, likely the result of his daughter's attempt to help bake. "She wanted to say thank you for the snow globe you mailed last month. She has been shaking it non-stop." I smiled, a genuine one that surprised even me. He lingered a moment, as if unsure whether to stay. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "Better. Some days. Not all of them." "That is normal," he said. "Healing is not a straight line." He did not press for more. Instead, he handed me a card with information for a trauma support group hosted at a community center a few blocks from my apartment. "There is no pressure," he added, but a few of the women there went through similar situations, and they helped each other more than any cop ever could. I took the card. "Thank you." He nodded once and stepped away, leaving me with the card and the cookies, and a strange sense of being supported in a way I had never felt before. A week later, I attended the support group. The first meeting felt terrifying, sitting in a circle of women who carried their own bruises, their own memories, their own stories they had been forced to survive. But when it was my turn to speak, something in me opened. I told them about my father, the house, the room, the escape, the hearing. The words flowed without shame. No one judged. No one doubted. They nodded, recognizing the texture of trauma without needing every detail explained. After the meeting, a woman named Sharon hugged me lightly, mindful of the bruise still healing along my ribs. "It gets better," she whispered. "Maybe not today, but it does. And sometimes you get to choose a family who treats you right." Those words followed me home that night and sank into my chest, warm and slow. A few days later, I visited Mrs. Dalton in Coldwater. I wanted to thank her in person. She greeted me with a tight emotional embrace at her door. "You scared us all," she murmured, "but I am so proud of you." Inside her warm kitchen, we sat at a small round table with chipped paint edges and a plate of pecan cookies between us. She told me she had watched my father spiral for years. She had wanted to intervene, but feared making things worse for me. "I do not blame you," I said. "You did more than anyone. You called 911. She took my hands in hers. "You saved yourself, Marley. You have always been stronger than he wanted you to believe." When I returned to Springfield that night, her words stayed with me. At the library, the branch manager called me into her office. She handed me a folder. Inside was an official offer letter. "We would like to promote you to branch director after the new year. You have earned it." My throat tightened. It was the position I had dreamed about quietly for years, but never believed I deserved. Now it felt like proof that my life could move forward in ways my father had always tried to prevent. I accepted the offer with shaking hands. The weeks soon filled with planning training sessions and meetings with staff from other branches. I felt useful, competent, and present in a way I had long forgotten was possible. Occasionally, Hayes stopped by the library to check on me when he was in the area. Our conversations grew easier. He had a gentle way of asking how I was doing without demanding an answer. One snowy afternoon, he found me reorganizing the genealogy section. He leaned against the doorway. "You seem lighter," he observed quietly. I looked up at him. "Maybe I am." He hesitated. "If you ever want to talk over coffee, not about the case, just as people, I would like that." A warmth that had nothing to do with trauma or survival spread through me. "I am not ready yet," I said honestly. His smile was soft. "That is okay. Healing takes time, and I am not going anywhere." I watched him leave, feeling something unfamiliar. Hope, real hope. As winter melted into early spring, the shadows of the past loosened their grip. I no longer startled at the creak of floorboards or the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway. I slept through the night without waking to listen for danger. I walked to work under clear skies, the cold morning air crisp and alive. One day, while shelving returns, a little boy tugged on my sleeve. "Miss Reed, how come you got a big bruise last month?" His mother gasped and apologized, but I knelt beside him. "I got hurt," I said gently, "but I am okay now." He smiled. "You are really tough." I ruffled his hair. Maybe. Or maybe I finally stopped being afraid. At home, I taped Caroline's business card to the inside of my desk drawer, right where I could see it every day. Not as a reminder of what happened, but as a reminder of how far I had come. The world I lived in now was wider, brighter, full of moments I had never allowed myself to believe I deserved. Healing was slow, but it was real. And every day I took one more step into the life I had built for myself, not the one my father had tried to trap me in forever. The year that followed felt like learning how to breathe again, one careful inhale at a time. Winter melted into a soft Missouri spring, then drifted into a warm summer that carried a gentleness I had never known growing up. By autumn, my life had taken a shape that felt mine fully and unquestionably mine, and I no longer flinched when the phone rang or when someone knocked at my door. Freedom, I discovered, was quiet. It did not roar. It whispered. It settled. It made room for other things to grow. And when December returned along with the first hints of Christmas decorations in storefront windows, something inside me shifted. I realized I was ready to close the last chapter, not in words, in person. I drove to Coldwater on a crisp morning, the kind where frost hugged the edges of the highway and the sky felt too pale to hold any storms. The closer I got to my childhood town, the more memories stirred, but none of them had the same power they once did. Fear had turned into distance, and distance into clarity. I parked in front of the old house, the same one that had held me captive in more ways than one. The paint had peeled even more along the siding, and the porch sagged slightly, but the house looked smaller now, almost fragile. It no longer felt like an animal I had spent my life trying to escape. It felt like a relic, a shell, a place that once had teeth but no longer had bite. Mrs. Dalton's curtains twitched across the street, and a moment later she stepped outside with her coat half buttoned. "I saw your car," she called, her voice warm. I walked across the street and she pulled me into a careful hug. "You look good," she said. "Lighter." I smiled. "I feel lighter." She squeezed my hands. "I am glad you came back on your terms." I nodded, then looked toward the house. "I need to go inside, just once more." She understood without asking why. I walked up the familiar steps, each one creaking under my feet, and unlocked the door with the spare key the sheriff's office had given me months ago to collect the last of my papers. The moment I stepped inside, I paused. I waited for fear to swell, for my chest to tighten, for the old panic to rise. But it did not. The house was silent, empty, cold. Whatever power it had held over me was gone. The living room still had the dent in the wall from years ago, the one my father created during a rage. The kitchen table was still the same, scratched and worn. The air still carried the faint scent of old wood and bitter memories. But it was just a place, a building, nothing more. I moved through the house, slowly touching nothing, only observing. When I reached the staircase, I felt my heartbeat quicken, not with fear, but with recognition. These stairs had once carried the weight of every terror I had known. They were the path to the room where I had been locked during the longest night of my life. I climbed them one step at a time. At the top, the hallway stretched before me, narrow and dim. My childhood bedroom door waited at the end, slightly ajar. I hesitated before reaching it, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to feel the moment fully. Then I pushed it open. The room was exactly as it had been after the investigation. The latch still hung on the outside of the door, the metal slightly bent from when I had forced my way out. The walls were bare, except for the faint outline where posters once hung. My old bed frame leaned crookedly against the wall screws missing from when I had used a piece of it to pry myself free. I stepped inside, letting the silence wrap around me. I remembered the girl who once hid in the closet to escape her father's shouts. The teenager who cried quietly into her pillow so the neighbors would not hear. The woman who had spent one last night in this room locked away like she had been as a child. I knelt beside the wall where the bed used to be and ran my fingers along the faint grooves in the floor. Marks I had never noticed. Marks from the past. Marks that no longer defined me. When I stood again, I turned toward the door and placed my hand on the latch. I traced its shape slowly, remembering the panic in my chest that night the way my hands shook as I worked the screws loose. I remembered the terror, and then I remembered the moment the door finally gave way, the moment I realized I could escape. I stepped outside the room, turned to face it, and took a long breath. Then I closed the door gently, not with anger, not with spite, with finality. A soft click echoed through the hallway, a sound that felt like a chapter ending. I whispered the words I had carried with me for months. You kept me locked in here for years, but today I am the one who closes this door. When I opened my eyes, the moment felt complete. Finished. I walked back down the stairs and out into the cold air where Mrs. Dalton waited on her porch with 2 mugs of cocoa. She handed one to me as I approached. "How was it?" she asked. I looked back at the house one last time. Quiet, empty, over. She nodded, understanding more than I said. I sipped the cocoa, letting the warmth spread through me. When I finally got back in my car, I felt something inside me settle into place. Closure. Not the dramatic kind people see in movies, the quiet kind. The kind that lets you breathe deeper than you ever have before. Driving out of Coldwater, I rolled down the window and let the winter air rush across my face. The sun glinted off the frost on the fields, turning everything pale gold. I thought about the year behind me, the women in my support group, the co-workers who had stood by me without needing explanations, the new role at the library that filled my days with purpose, and the gentle presence of Officer Hayes, who never asked for more than I could give, but always offered more support than I expected. Freedom had not been a single moment. It had been a series of choices. Small ones, hard ones, brave ones. And each one had carried me here. When I reached Springfield, I parked in front of my apartment, turned off the car, and sat quietly for a moment, letting the stillness settle. Then I spoke aloud to no one in particular, to everyone who needed to hear it. If you have ever had to save yourself from your own family, you are not alone. If you stayed with me until the very end of this story, thank you. I know this one was heavy, and if it stirred something inside you, if it brought back memories you have spent years trying to outrun, I want you to take a slow breath right now and just sit with the fact that you made it here. Not everyone understands what it means to grow up in a house where the people who should have protected you were the same ones who taught you fear. Not everyone knows the courage it takes to walk away, to rebuild, to choose yourself. But if you know that feeling, if you have lived even a part of it, then please hear me when I say this. Nothing that happened to you was your fault. You did not deserve the anger, the shouting, the control, the shame, the nights you cried yourself to sleep. You were a child trying to survive someone who should have been your shelter, not your storm. And if you made it out, whether it was last year or 20 years ago, that makes you stronger than you will ever fully give yourself credit for. And if you are still in it, still trying to find the moment when you can say enough and walk away, I want you to know that your story is not over. There are people out there who will believe you. There are people who will stand beside you. There are people who will help you break the cycle you did not ask to be born into. You deserve a life that feels peaceful when you wake up in the morning. You deserve a home that does not make your stomach tighten when you hear footsteps in the hallway. You deserve to be loved, gently spoken to, kindly, listened to, fully. You deserve laughter that does not come with an apology after. And if you are watching this from a quiet room or your car after a long shift or from a small apartment you finally call your own, I want you to know that I am proud of you for surviving everything you never should have had to face. I hope this story reminds you that healing is messy and slow and not at all linear, but it is possible. I hope it reminds you that even the smallest steps count. Calling someone, reaching out, saying no, protecting your peace. And if you are comfortable, I would genuinely love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? And if this story touched a part of your life you do not talk about often, you can tell me as little or as much as you want. You are not alone here. Not today. Not ever. And if no one has told you this in a long time, let me be the one to say it. You made it out of the dark. You did the hardest part, and the world you deserve is still waiting for you.